Welcome, everyone. So, you've bought the software, you've scheduled the kickoff, and you've hyped up the team. But somewhere between configuration and go live, things got, well, complicated. Sound familiar? Trust me, you are absolutely not alone. In today's explainer, we're diving deep into lab digitalization based on the LIMS deployment guide. We're going to look at the harsh reality of software implementation and give you the exact blueprint for what to do before, during, and after you launch your Laboratory Information Management System, or LIMS. The sheer scale of this problem is honestly mind-blowing. According to the 2026 State of the Industry survey, a staggering 75%, that's literally 3 out of 4 labs, report persistent integration issues after deploying their LIMS. And here's the real shocker. When you ask them what held them back, budget actually comes in dead last. The real hurdles? Regulatory complexity, tricky integrations, and staff resistance. Long story short, the software isn't the villain here. The lab just wasn't ready for it. There's a really uncomfortable truth that a lot of vendors just don't want to tell you. A LIMS only amplifies broken processes instead of fixing them. If you drop expensive, highly complex software on top of a chaotic, fragmented workflow, it doesn't magically fix that workflow. You're basically just creating a wildly expensive, digitized version of the exact same mess. To make sure that doesn't happen to you, here is our roadmap for today. First, preparation and pitfalls. Second, a real-world case study. Third, implementation and costs. And finally, success after go live. Let's get right into it. Section 1, preparation and pitfalls. Let's talk about what labs absolutely must do before they even think about configuring a system. Before you ask, which system should we buy, you really need to ask, are we even ready for a system? And that starts with walking the lab floor and recording what's actually happening, not what should be happening. How much time are you spending on manual data entry per role? What are your average and peak sample turnaround times? You have to define these pre-deployment baseline KPIs. You need to measure your compliance findings over the past 12 months and figure out how much time your QA team spends on documentation versus actual analysis. You can't hit an ROI target you haven't tracked, and these baseline numbers are going to give you a bulletproof business case for the finance department. Okay, once you have those baselines, you have to protect your project from the ultimate budget killer, scope creep. Scope creep is the continuous addition of modules, integrations, and templates mid-project. And let me tell you, it will reliably destroy your timelines and your budgets. Every spontaneous request for a custom report or a new instrument connection derails things. You need to strictly define your day one scope. Lock in exactly what core sample management goes live immediately, and push all those non-essential extras like specific ERP integrations or connecting external service labs firmly into phase 2. Moving on to section 2, real-world case study. Let's look at the massive financial impact of doing this pre-deployment assessment the right way. This brings us to Frifag Märwil AG, a Swiss poultry producer that handles everything from animal feed to final delivery. Before committing to a massive software rollout, they were smart. They commissioned a 1LMS lab check workshop. The goal was to deeply analyze their highly fragmented, error-prone paper-to-Excel workflows and see if digitalization would actually pay off. 55%. The assessment revealed that lab staff were spending an unbelievable 55% of their total working time just managing data. They were painstakingly transferring data from paper to Excel and then into emails. Every single handoff created delays and potential errors instead of, actually letting them act on that data. By mapping these exact processes with 1L LIMS, they projected that a proper deployment would slash the QA data management workload from taking up 32% of a full-time employee's schedule down to just 10%. To put that into perspective, that translates directly to saving 15,400 Swiss francs every single year. All of this added up to a massive projected ROI of 71%. And the beauty of this, these numbers were calculated before a single workflow was even configured. This is exactly why pre-deployment data is so incredibly crucial. It gives leadership total data-backed confidence before the actual configuration even starts. All right, shifting gears to section 3, implementation and costs. You've prepped, but what does the actual rollout look like? And more importantly, what does a LIMS realistically cost? We're going to be totally transparent here. Based on 1LIMS data, a budget consists of a predictable, ongoing subscription plus one-time implementation costs. For small labs, first-year total costs usually sit between 10 and 15,000 euros. For large or highly complex labs, we're talking 40 to 50,000 euros, or sometimes more. This scales entirely based on your user count, workflow complexity, and the specific integrations you need. But building the software budget is really only half the battle. you have to watch out for the two most underestimated and dangerous budget items: data migration and change management. Statistics show that 29% of labs cite staff resistance as their biggest roadblock. If you ignore your team's anxiety about unfamiliar workflows, or if you pretend those messy, decade-old historical Excel spreadsheets don't exist, your project is going to stall out completely right in the middle of implementation. To avoid this data migration nightmare, you have to be proactive before deployment even starts. Audit your existing data for duplicates and gaps. Establish strict naming conventions. Decide exactly what truly needs to migrate versus what should just be archived, and assign clear ownership and sign-off authority. Migration is not just some annoying background task you can offload to the vendor. It has to be treated by your own team as a dedicated, parallel workstream. Because honestly, if you just dump old, dirty data into a brand new system, you are in for a very nasty surprise on launch day. And speaking of launch day, before you go live, you have UAT, User Acceptance Testing. Please do not treat this as just a box to tick. This is a rigorous stress test. You need to run through full workflows with real sample volumes, test those demanding client report generations, intentionally provoke edge cases and instrument failures, and make sure the system correctly flags results that fall outside of specifications. When you train on your configured instance using your real data. The absolute goal here is zero surprises.
And now we've arrived at the final and arguably most critical phase, Section 4, Success After Go Live.
Here is the golden rule for Go Live. Launch on a defined date and shut down the old system completely. The temptation to run your old Excel lists and the new LIMS in parallel is huge, but it is an absolute trap. It creates workflow ambiguity. If the old spreadsheet is still there, someone is going to use it, and suddenly the new system feels totally optional.
Which brings us to the ultimate villain of today's explainer, the Excel fallback. When the first week of Go Live gets a little bumpy, and it always does, muscle memory kicks in. The moment there's friction or someone can't find a feature right away, the temptation to revert to those comfortable old Excel spreadsheets is incredibly strong.
Defeating that Excel fallback has to be your absolute #1 priority in those early weeks. You do this by making the LIMS the path of least resistance. Daily tasks simply must be genuinely faster in the system than outside of it. If there are operational inconveniences, fix them immediately. Even better, use this time to build internal admin expertise to avoid vendor dependency. One LIMS, for example, specifically trains lab administrators so they can tweak workflows and solve issues themselves without having to call the vendor every single time. You want to master your system, not be dependent on it.
Once Phase 1 is stable and your team is fully on board, you're obviously going to want to start adding all those deferred features, but you have to scale deliberately. Don't just throw everything in at once. Measure and document your Phase 1 KPIs around weeks 6 to 8. Define your new scope cleanly before you start configuring, and carefully plan your testing and sign-off. Phase 2 requires the exact same iron discipline as day 1. Which brings us to our final parting thought for today. Take a hard look at your current lab workflows and ask yourself honestly, is your lab truly ready for a LIMS, or are you just automating chaos? Software merely reflects the structure that already exists. Do your homework, map your processes, and manage your deployment with strict discipline. That is exactly how you turn an expensive software implementation into a massive, measurable win for your lab. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and I hope this gives you the exact blueprint you need for a successful digitalization.